Hi, my name is Asen Timig, and this is my Gothic Art History 2710 final piece. In this final, I took my completed antique stained glass window piece of my original character named Constella from my fourth discovery project and completely redid the piece with a more accurate antique window style tailored towards real life stained glass window pieces made in the 1200s in the Europe area. And to top it all off, I then took my recreated piece and turned it into a realistic window in the 3D animation software Blender. So the first thing I did for this final was that I took my old piece and completely redid the piece with more accuracy. The difference being that with a lot of research, I learned why my piece was so far off from real stained glass windows in the first place. For one, I originally didn't understand why the pieces were different sizes, so I eyeballed it and every panel was huge, and then for the character they were super small with no easy transition. Plus, or I used a ton of colors as well that weren't accurate to actual stained glass windows. So I did some research into how stained glass windows are made and found out that the border lines are lead lines that stick the panels together. And for old stained glass windows, there was a pattern of multiple different shades of the same color. So my recreation of my old piece from my fourth project, I took into account how you would actually make this piece real with panels. So I had a lot of extra support lead lines, and I had a lot of different shaped panels for the color I'm going to add. To top off the recreation, I tailored my piece towards an actual style and time period of real life stained glass windows. So I themed mine around more towards two pieces that were made in the 1200s in the Europe area. Throughout this time lapse, you can actually see me pulling up the picture of this piece right here called Theodius Arrives as Ephesus from a scene from the legend of the seven sleepers of Ephesus. I totally butchered that. And I referenced this piece for the main color choices of shades of blue, red, and yellow, and the actual shapes of the panels themselves. In this piece, I noticed that there were shade differences in the color. So for each color in my piece other than white, I used three different shades of color to better match the style of the real window. I also every once in a while referenced another piece called The Scenes from the Legend of Saint Vincent of Saragossa and the History of His Relics. This is another 1200 era piece, and I reference this piece because my piece is more shaped like this one, and I reference the shapes of the panels in this piece. So already I was off to a better start with my recreation. It's more accurate towards real stained glass windows, and the colors are way better and harmonious than my old piece. Right here, I had to actually touch up my colors, so I had to trace every panel in Photoshop to actually make the color all together. And so there was nothing left by the lead line, so every color actually connected. The next thing I did was take my piece into the 3D software Blender to make my piece into a realistic window to see it in the closest way possible how this window would look if it was a real window in an old style church brick wall with light passing through it. To start off, I turned my PNG from Photoshop into an SVG file so I can use it in Blender more easily so I can extract the frame from the piece with ease. Then I gave the outside lead frame some thickness and texture to make the piece more realistic. As you can see right there, I also wrote down the hex colors of my color shades because I was going to combine the colors into their own respective groups, and I'll bring back the color shades in the end of this piece. So the next thing I did was group out the colors and name them properly in my layers and deleted all of the extra residue left over from the SVG file. Next, I had to extrude my panels so they would fit in the actual frame itself. And this was one of the most tedious and longest steps yet. The red color at the end took the absolute longest since it didn't like what I was doing apparently, but it worked out in the end. Eventually, all of my glass panels did fit the actual frame, so it's time to turn it into realistic glass. I turned each color group into a mesh so I can interact with its properties. I added a big shader to turn my blue glass group into actual glass, and I used my previous written down hex codes to bring back my different shades of blue. And I did the same for the rest of all my other colors. Next, I finally had to make a scene for the window to live in. I used an add-on to give me a base castle-esque wall, and I used it as a base and formed it to fit my window panel. I then added other walls and touched up my edges. And then added floor panels to fill in the cracks so light would only pass through the window. Next, I added fog so when the light passed through the window, you can see the actual window rays in the air. Next, I gave my walls a rock texture and my floor and roof a wooden texture and finally rendered my scenes. And these are my final rendered shots of my windows. These took a while for my computer to render out, and I'm pretty proud of the end result. I learned a ton with this project, and I loved learning actual history on stained glass window pieces and being able to reproduce one in my own way. Yeah, some tweaks could be needed here and there, but I really like how my final project turned out. Thank you, Mr. Kosorok, for working with me on this project, and thank you guys for watching.